Hi, my name is Callie Chappelle, and thanks for watching this video about cross-examination part 2, entitled Conquering Cross-Ex. This is a video which is part of the Go Fight Win Novice Debate series, which is a series of videos aimed at teaching novices how to do policy debate. So welcome! My name is Callie Chappelle. I am a debater for the University of Michigan, and I debated for Traverse City Central High School. I'm a second negative first affirmative speaker, and a fun fact about me is that my partner's favorite thing in cross-ex was asking questions about theory arguments. Alright, so to make the most out of these videos, you should take notes and rewatch bits you need re-explained. Hopefully we'll have worksheets and or supplemental materials that go along with the video, so check out the video description or comments there. Next, you don't need to memorize it all. All we want you to do is at least be familiar with everything in the video, because it's a building process. I'm going to be talking about things later in other videos that refer to things that you learned in this one. And finally, your coach may like things differently, or you might like to debate a different style. That's totally okay. This is just one starting point, not an end point. Alright, so quick review. From part 1, these are the things that you should understand from after watching part 1 of this video, or the previous video. First, what is cross-ex? Second, when is cross-ex? And third is AF and neg basics for cross-ex. So these are the things that you absolutely need to make sure that you know after cross-ex is done. And this is where we're going. So the first half of the video is novice pro tips for cross-ex. So these are the things that novices you really should practice doing. And then the next part is cross-ex strategies for each speech. So we'll go through the cross-ex, each individual cross-ex, and then talk about things that you should be asking in each cross-ex. So, pro tips for novices. Just a reminder, you to bomb. Alright, pro tip number 1. The judge may be sleeping. Well, not exactly, but the judge may not be paying very close attention. Kind of like what you do at large family dinners when your relatives are talking about like stocks, whether your sister's dance recital, whatever, and you just like zone out. That may be what the judge is doing during your cross-ex. So the point is, judges don't flow cross-ex. So if you get a super awesome argument in cross-ex, or if you get a super great concession, you have to bring it up in your speech for the judge to write it down and evaluate it at the end of the debate. So don't just I like to call this Vegasing. Shout out to Brian Rubai for coming up with that. They say what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. What happens in cross-ex should not stay in cross-ex. It should be taken to your speech. The second is, number 2, is don't be flippant. Cross-ex is serious. We say that cross-ex is binding. Keyword binding, you should write that down. So things you say are true in cross-ex are also true for the rest of the round. It also helps you plan the 1NC and the 2AC. So for example, if the 1AC says they use military for ice breaking, they can't later say, no, we don't do that, after you say the military is bad. On the same line, the AF can't say we spend lots of money, and then say we don't spend any money after you read your spending DA. So be careful about what you say in cross-ex because it could come back to haunt you. Pro tip number 3 is bring cross-ex in your speech. Bring up cross-ex in your speech. Make sure you bring up important points made in cross-ex in your speech. So for example, if they can't explain the link in cross-ex, then you should tell the judge they should be skeptical. The judge, when their judge is evaluating the round, they should be skeptical of the link. So you could say this in a round. Remember that long, awkward pause in cross-ex when I asked what the link to the disad was? They clearly don't understand the link debate. So you should default AF on our better explanation of why we don't link. If you get them to concede the link in cross-ex, integrate it into your speech. For example, if they concede the plan spends a lot of money, then you should say they spotted us the link to the spending DA in cross-ex when they said, and then insert whatever they said. Like I said, don't Vegas. Bring things from cross-ex into your speech. Pro tip number 4. It's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay if you don't have the answer to a question. You can look it up in your evidence during cross-ex, or you can just say that you don't know. It looks a lot better, to be honest, than if you're like, oh, I don't know why I didn't finish it off. But if you just lie about it, and then the other team's like, no, you're wrong, and then you look really bad. Quick side note, Freakonomics actually just did a really cool podcast about why people hate saying I don't know, and why that failure to say it actually costs the US economy a bunch of money. Yeah, I'm kind of nerdy, so I'd highly recommend you check that out. Pretty fun. Alright, awkward situations and how to avoid them. Nobody wants to be the awkward turtle in cross-ex, so look at these awesome tips and you'll be really good. So, what if they're fishing for links? So, here is a characterization of the culprit. Here's the obvious one. Does your plan link to the spending DA? And you're like, no. Or maybe you are like, maybe, I don't know. And then here's a sneaky version of this question. It looks like you have a lot of impacts about extinction. why don't you talk about animals? So they're fishing for an anthropocentrism critique link. This is what you say to the second one. Out of the 1AC, we don't take a stand on that being anthropocentrism. If you'd like to ask us a question about aquaculture, we would love to answer it. I don't know why it's messed up here. Ignore that. So you can say, if they're like asking about something that's like totally random, you could just be like, the 1AC doesn't take a stance on that. We don't say that that's good or bad. So why are you asking about that? That's totally okay. All right. Situation 2. What if they won't stop talking and let you ask a question? Just say, thank you, I'd like to move on. If they still don't stop talking, they're just like blabbering on and on and on, you can just cut them off and ask another question. This is the potential to backfire, though, and make you look bad, and we'll talk about that in the next slide, so you should use this as a strategy of last resort. Being polite and kindly being like, can we move on, is much better, and the judge will notice that as well, if you're being polite and they're being rude. So, the next one, what if they keep cutting you off from answering a question? Well, you should answer questions succinctly and accurately enough the first time that they shouldn't have to cut you off. You just answer their question. If they're cutting you off because they're really rude, just say politely, please let me finish this thought, and then quickly wrap up your explanation. Alright, so what if they're being rude? You should be the better person. If you don't sink to their level and treat them well, then even if they're being rude, the judge will notice that and reward you for it. So don't sink to their level, just be the nice guy in the situation, or the nice gal. If they say something that really offends you, then you can do one of the following 3 things. First is you can talk to them after the round and mention what specifically they said that offended you and why that made you feel uncomfortable. Second is you can talk to your coach about what happened. And then the third, in the debate round, you can say, I think you're being a little bit rude. Sometimes the shock of this is enough to solve the problem, but make sure that you do it politely. Okay, don't be like, I think you're being rude and you're a horrible person. You should just stop debate. Like, don't say that. Just be like, oh, I think that's a little bit rude. Do you mind not doing that? Like, you're making me feel uncomfortable. And then I'm sure they'll stop. Okay, so this can range from a lot of different things. They could be rude. Sometimes boys can be rude to girls in cross-ex. Make sure that doesn't happen. Make sure that doesn't happen. Always be nice to people no matter their gender. Sometimes someone may make like a racist comment, and that's just not okay. And the only way for people to learn is if you point it out. Just point it out in a nice way so they change, and instead of pointing it out in a rude way where they just get to be defensive. Alright, so cross-ex speech by speech. So this is meant to be geared towards older novice who's already debated a little bit. If you're getting overwhelmed about cross-ex, you can just pause the video here and come back to it when you have a little bit more debate under your belt. That's totally okay. However, if you are an older novice and you want to know more about cross-ex, then you should definitely continue watching. And if you decide that you don't want to continue with this set of with the cross-ex videos because you're getting a little bit overwhelmed, you should definitely come back and watch it after you've maybe gone to a tournament or after you've done a practice debate. So, cross-ex of the 1AC by the 2N. So you should do 2 different things. First, you should try to set up disadd links to the plan. So, for example, if you want to read the spending DA, you can say you can say these things. First, you could say, it seems like your plan does a lot of different things. How would the government go about implementing the plan? And then they answer, and then you're like, oh, really? Who would fund that? And then they tell you exactly who funds it. All right, so you could say, what makes your plan different than aquaculture and the status quo? Aren't there projects that do the same thing as the AF right now? And then they're like, wow, no, we created a new program. And then you're like, oh, really? So you fund a new program. And then that's the link to the spending DA. Next, you should ask about how the plan solves. So usually the AF solves the evidence is really bad. And their authors oftentimes give other things besides the AF that are needed to solve. So you should point these out. So you could say, and this is true for the aquaculture AF, the YC Chopin evidence says that we also need to cut off offshore nutrient runoff at the source. So what does the AF do to cut down on these sources and prevent industry concern that the card is talking about? Right, so you can point out things in the evidence that flow neg. Alright, so strategies for the cross-ex of the 1NC by the 1A. So you should ask about all of the case arguments. Do they make sense? Are they about your AF specifically, or are they super generic? If they're not, so you should definitely establish that the 1NC is like not great against the case, because obviously that's what you're gonna most likely go for in the 2AR. Also, you should make sure that you ask what the condition of the counterplan and or critique is. Their answers will be, they'll say it's either conditional, unconditional, or dispositional. Then, depending on what they say, you can read theory arguments about why reading a counterplan that way is bad. So, like, let's say you're like, what is the status of the counterplan? And they're like, it's conditional. Then you can read conditionality bad. if you haven't learned about what conditionality, dispositionality, or unconditionality is yet, that's totally okay. You can just ignore this for now, but come back after you've learned about it in the counterplan theory lecture. All right, cross-ex of the 1NC by the 1A. So here are two things that you should definitely cross-ex about. First is, how does the counterplan solve the AF? So you need to find out the mechanism of the counterplan, how exactly it solves the exact mechanism of the AF, as well as the advantages of the AF. And then you should figure out how the AF links to the net benefit, but the counterplan does not. It's a really easy way to take out counterplans. If you win either that the counterplan also links to the net benefit, then it's not net beneficial to the counterplan. Or if you win, or you just take out the disad that is the net benefit, right? The second thing you should definitely be focusing on is finding out what the heck the K does. So find out what the link is, figure out what parts of the AF the K disagrees with. So that's finding out if it's a floating pick. If you don't know what that is, that's totally okay. We'll talk about it in the K lecture. You should find out if there's a role of the ballot or a framework argument. And again, don't worry about this if you haven't learned about Ks. But you should definitely be asking questions about the K, because even I, like, when I hear a new K, I'm just like, I have no idea what they're talking about. And, like, I just have to ask, like, really dumb questions, like, what is the link? All right, cross-ex of the 2AC by the 1N. So you should make sure you know all of the theory arguments that the 2AC made. So examples include if they read conditionality, framework, process counterplan theory, or international fiat bad, utopian fiat bad, etc. And you should nail down the 2AC to any theory interpretations. So, for example, on conditionality, you should make sure you know what the interpretation is. If it's one counterplan, 1K, if the theory interpretation for framework is the all has to be a policy option, etc. You should make sure that you know these things, because that'll change how you choose to answer those arguments in the neg block. And finally, you should ask specific questions about what you're planning to take in the 1NR. So, for example, if the 1NR is going to take the politics disad, because the 1N is doing the cross-ex, you want to be asking about stuff that you'll be taking, so it's beneficial to you. And finally, cross-ex of the 2NC by the 2A. So you should make arguments that you dropped in the 2AC or want to flesh out more. So, like, ask about things that you plan on discussing more, and then have them explain things, and then while they explain things, like, point out why their arguments don't make sense, so make sure your argument's better. And then you should ask about arguments that you predict they'll go for in the 2NR to make those look bad. And finally, have a battle on case. You know your case better than the neg team, so you should show them who's boss, right? Don't take any shenanigans about how they're quote-unquote destroying your case, because they're not. You know your AF better than they do, and you should prove it. Alright, so this is the end of part 2, but coming up after the break is part 3, including advanced cross-ex techniques. So we're going to talk about some cross-ex techniques that are more advanced. Advanced meaning anybody can do them, but they are techniques that are a little bit harder than the basics. And finally, this is pretty fun, the 6 people you don't want to meet in cross-ex, aka what not to do in cross-ex. So I hope you join us after the break, and I'll see you then. Thanks, bye.